What is the scariest, strangest, most unexplainable thing that has happened to you while home alone? Story 1. I've always been a bit skeptical of supernatural occurrences, but what happened to me a few years ago still sends chills down my spine. I was living in a small apartment with my boyfriend and our 2 cats. It was a cozy place, and we never had any issues until that one night. I remember sitting on the couch watching TV while my boyfriend was in the kitchen making dinner. Our cats were lounging nearby and everything seemed normal. Suddenly, one of our cats, a black one named Salem, jumped up and started hissing at the ceiling. It was such an odd behavior for him, so I tried to calm him down. But the hissing only grew louder and more intense. My boyfriend came over to see what was going on, and we both looked up at the ceiling, but we saw nothing out of the ordinary. That's when we heard it, a loud growl coming from somewhere in the apartment. At first, we thought it was one of our cats, but then we heard it again, and it was coming from somewhere above us. The growling continued, and we both felt a sense of dread wash over us. We decided to grab our cats and leave the apartment for a bit, just to clear our heads. As we were leaving, we saw that Salem had left a strange scratch mark on the wall, almost like something had clawed at it. We came back to the apartment later that night, still feeling uneasy, but everything seemed normal. The cats were back to their usual selves and there were no more strange sounds or marks. We chalked it up to our imaginations and went to bed, but the next morning we woke up to find more of those strange scratch marks all over the walls. There was no explanation we could find. We moved out of the apartment soon after that, and to this day, we still don't know what caused the strange occurrences. Story 2. I was renting a basement apartment in an old house in the suburbs. I had just moved in and was thrilled to finally have a place of my own. The previous tenant had left a lot of junk behind, including an old bookshelf that was leaning against the wall in the living room. I decided to clear it up and reorganize the books. As I was moving the last few books, I noticed a small door behind the bookshelf that I hadn't noticed before. I was curious, so I opened the door to find a small crawl space. It was dark and musty, but I could see a glint of light coming from the other side. I crawled through the space, which was only about 3 feet high, and found myself in a small room. It was empty except for an old rocking chair in the corner. I shuddered and quickly crawled back out, closing the door behind me. That night, I was in bed reading when I heard a faint creaking sound. It sounded like it was coming from the living room. I got up to investigate but found nothing out of the ordinary. The next night, the sound was louder and more persistent. I realized it was coming from the crawl space. I tried to ignore it, but it was keeping me up at night. One night, I decided to confront my fear and investigate the crawl space again. I crawled through the space and found the same empty room, but this time the rocking chair was moving on its own. I froze, watching as it rocked back and forth. Suddenly, I heard a faint whispering sound. I couldn't make out what it was saying, but it sounded like a woman's voice. I crawled back out as fast as I could and slammed the door shut. From that night on, I could hear the creaking and whispering every night. I tried to ignore it, but it was driving me insane. I started locking myself in my room at night, but the sound was so loud, it was like it was coming from inside my head. I couldn't take it anymore. One day, I finally mustered up the courage to tell the landlord about the strange noises. He seemed surprised and told me that no one had ever mentioned anything like that before. He checked the crawl space and found nothing out of the ordinary, but I knew there was something really wrong. I decided to pack my bags and left the apartment that same night, never to return. I still have no idea what was making those noises, but I know I never want to hear them again. Story 3. I had just moved to a new town with my wife and we were struggling financially due to the pandemic, so I decided to take an overnight job at a factory to help us out. I was scheduled to work from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. One night, after leaving for work, my wife called me to say that she and our son, who was 7 years old, were going to watch a movie together. I felt a little guilty for not being able to join them, but I knew we needed the money. Around 1 a.m., I received a call from my wife. She was in tears and could barely speak. She said that someone had broken into our house and that she heard footsteps and voices downstairs when she entered. I told her to stay on the line and call the police immediately. As I was talking to the dispatcher, I heard a loud banging on the door of the factory, but when I went to open it, there was no one there. I felt uneasy and decided to go home myself. I rushed home with my heart pounding, not knowing what to expect. When I got there, I entered the house and found that it was completely untouched. No signs of a break-in, no open windows or doors, nothing. My wife and son were both on the couch sleeping. I woke my wife up to ask her what had happened, but she was confused about my question and told me that they came back very tired from the movies and fell asleep on the couch a couple hours ago. I asked her about what she told me on the phone, but she said she never called me. To this day, I still don't know what happened that night, and I don't know if I even want to. Story 4. I was house-sitting for my friend Emma while she was out of town for a week. I had stayed at her place before, so I knew my way around. The only thing that made me a little uneasy was the fact that her house was old and creaky. The floors creaked with every step and the doors would often stick, making a loud noise when opened. On the third night of house-sitting, I started feeling a little queasy. Emma's bedroom was upstairs, and she had a larger bathroom up there as well. I decided to sleep in the guest room that night, which was downstairs and had its own half bathroom. Sometime in the middle of the night, I heard a soft knocking on the guest room door. I groggily go out of bed and open the door to see who it was. To my surprise, there was no one there. I assumed I must have been dreaming, so I closed the door and went back to sleep. A few minutes later, I heard the knocking again. This time it was louder and more urgent. I opened the door once more, but again, nobody was there. I started feeling uneasy, so I turned on the lights and checked all the rooms in the house. Everything seemed to be in order, and there was nobody around. I went back to bed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I was facing away from the door when I heard a woman's voice ask, "Are you okay?" I assumed it was Emma, even though she wasn't supposed to be back until the next day. I replied, "Yes, I'm fine, thanks for checking on me." But when I turned around to see who it was, there was nobody there. The door was wide open and I could see the empty hallway beyond. I quickly got up and checked the entire house again, but there was nobody there. I locked the doors and windows and sat in the living room until morning. The next day, I called Emma and told her what had happened. She was surprised and a little spooked, but she assured me that nobody else had a key to her house. We both agreed that it was probably just my imagination and I tried to forget about it. But every time I stayed at Emma's house after that, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It wasn't until years later, when Emma sold the house and moved away, that I finally felt at ease. I never did figure out what happened that night, but I still get chills thinking about it. Story 5. I used to live in a small apartment complex in college. One night I was up late studying when I heard my roommate's dog barking incessantly. It was unusual for him to be barking like that, so I got up to see what was going on. I went to the kitchen where the dog was standing, barking at the door leading to the hallway. The hallway was pitch black, so I couldn't see anything. I figured it was probably just a noise from outside, so I tried to calm the dog down. But then I saw a figure move across the hall from one side to the other. It was completely black and had an unnaturally tall, lanky bill. I froze and the dog continued to bark at it. I turned on the hallway light, but there was no one there. I went to check the other rooms in the apartment, but there was no sign of anyone. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The next day, I asked my roommate if he had noticed anything strange in the apartment. He told me that he had heard weird noises at night, but had dismissed them as just the building settling. But then he told me something that sent chills down my spine. He said that his girlfriend had visited a few days before and had seen something, a black figure crawling around on all fours in the hallway at night, and that it was something bigger than his dog. He didn't believe her at the time, but now he was starting to wonder. We never found out what the figure was or why it was in our apartment, but it was enough to make us both move out as soon as our lease was up. Story 6. I've always loved staying home alone. I was 16 and my parents trusted me to be responsible. It was a warm summer evening and I was sitting on the couch in the living room, scrolling through my phone. My cat was sleeping on my lap. Suddenly, She woke up and started growling, staring at the front door. I thought it was odd because my cat never acted like that before. I tried to calm her down, but she just kept staring at the door and growling. Then I heard footsteps on the front porch, like someone running towards the door. I froze. I knew it wasn't my parents because they always called or texted me before coming home. The footsteps continued to get closer to the door, and then there was a loud knock. I was terrified, but I didn't know what to do. I couldn't call the police because I didn't have any evidence that something was wrong. So I sat there in silence, heart pounding in my chest. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps and knocking stopped. I sat there for a few more minutes, still shaking with fear, before getting up to check the door. There was no one there. I never did find out who or what was outside that night. Story 7. I was in my apartment sitting on the couch and watching TV when I heard a knock on the door. It was odd because I wasn't expecting anyone. I walked over to the door, peeped through the peephole, but didn't see anyone. I shrugged it off, thinking it must have been kids playing a prank, and went back to the couch. About 10 minutes later, I heard a sound from my balcony. I got up to check it out and saw 2 people trying to climb into my apartment. I screamed and quickly locked the balcony door. They looked up and saw me watching them. They ran away, but it left me shaken and scared. I called the police and they came within minutes. They took my statement and I gave them a description of the suspects, but they were never caught. It was a terrifying experience and I couldn't sleep properly for weeks. After that incident, I decided to install a security system in my apartment. Let me know your stories in the comments to be part of a future video. Like and subscribe to be notified of new uploads. And click on this video to hear more stories.